Hi everyone, I'm Stephanie London and welcome back to my channel. So today's video is going to be on where to start your story. So this is something that I see a lot reading competition entries and reading, people's work when they ask for feedback. And something that I kind of struggled with a little bit when I started out writing is figuring out the best spot to start your story. Now, one common mistake that I see with a lot of newer writers is that the start of the story tends to be a place where they want to get the reader up to speed, which means pages and pages of dialogue and explaining and all kinds of backstory related things that really are not that exciting for the reader and don't kind of propel them into your story and make them want to continue reading. The start of the story is very important. I mean, all parts of the story are important, but the start is what is going to sell the reader on your book, whether it's a person that's going to be purchasing it or whether it's catching the attention of an agent or editor. A strong opening really is, a kind of a critical moment. Now, there's a lot of pressure on the opening. It needs to do a lot of things. It needs to give, firstly, the reader an idea of your voice. Is this going to be a dark and creepy gothic novel? Is it going to be lighthearted and fun and flirty? Is it going to be action-packed and full of suspense? The opening is basically kind of expectation setting for what the rest of the book is going to be like, and I think that this is something that challenges new writers, and that when you're entering a lot of competitions, you're really polishing up that first chapter over and over and over, and then sometimes it can kind of turn into something that doesn't match the rest of the book. So that's something to be careful of. The other thing that the opening needs to do is introduce us to the main character, whether it's the hero, the heroine, or both of them if you've got them starting together on page one, and give the reader an idea of who they are and what it is that they're aiming to achieve through the story. We need to care about these people as early as possible. So the opening has to kind of, hook the reader in and generate some sympathy for whatever plight your character is facing. Something to keep in mind is there is no one right way to start a story. You'll see lots of arguments for and against whether you should start with a line of dialogue or whether that's a bad idea. If you're a skilled writer, you can start the story any way you like, so long as you get the reader's attention and keep them reading. Something else to remember is that great openings to books don't always happen first time. I think when we read a lot of books, we think that, these magical words just fly out of authors' fingers, but that's not really the case. If you write the opening to your book and you go back later on and you think, actually, I think that another scene would work, or maybe this should be set in a different area, rewrite it and see how it fits. The perfect opening doesn't have to come the first time that you write it, so don't be too hard on yourself and keep working on that opening until it is as perfect and all-encompassing as it needs to be. So I'm going to share an example of an opening of a book that I read recently that I absolutely loved. As I tend to do these kind of craft-based videos, I'll probably refer to a lot of romance novels just because that's what I write and it's what I read. But these tips are kind of, I feel like they're fairly universal, and even if you're not a romance writer, that you might be able to take something away from this video. So a book that I read recently that had a really great opening was Alaskan Homecoming by Terry Wilson. Now, I met Terry at the Romance Writers of America conference earlier this year, and she actually gave me this book. I read it last week, I think, and it was just absolutely amazing. So you'll see that in my October wrap-up. But this book basically starts with a ballerina who has a broken leg walking into a church hall and has found a bear eating out of an overturned kind of trash can. And it's funny, but kind of suspenseful, and there's a lot of trepidation about her even being back in her hometown. She's obviously a ballerina with a broken leg, which has an inherent sense of conflict to it, but there is kind of an amusing quality to the opening as well, which is very fitting for the way that Terry writes her stories. One way that you can start your story is with a moment of change for the main character. Now, in romance, we tend to have two main characters, the hero and the heroine, or the hero and the hero, or heroine and heroine, depending on what you're writing. One of those characters, or both of them, can be experiencing a moment of change in the first opening pages of the story. So it could be that your heroine has walked into her new job and turns out the boss is the one that got away, something like that. Anything that changes the course of your character's life is a great point to open up the story. Something else that can happen is a moment of action, which is probably what I would classify this as. Heroine has walked into a church hall to find a giant bear in there, and now she has to figure out what she's going to do. The moment of action should be related to the character's conflict or their situation in some way, so don't kind of put a gratuitous action scene at the start of the book just because you think it makes it more exciting. Make sure it has something to do with the plot. The other way that you can start a story is with a point of empathy. So something terrible is happening to one of your characters, and immediately you can get the readers on side to sympathize with that character and what their plight is. An example of starting with a moment of empathy would be Holly Black's Coldest Girl in Cold Town, which I recently featured in the books that I read in September. The main character wakes up at a house party and everyone there is dead and they've been killed by a vampire. So that's kind of a little bit action, but also a little bit empathy as well, because if you put yourself in the character's shoes, like imagine how horrible that would be to wake up and face that and be trying to figure out what to do next. So there is a lot of kind of blurred lines between these different ways of opening your story, but you can kind of pick one that you think will suit the tone of the book and will suit the character's situation best. So getting back to backstory, I think that the intention that a lot of people have when they start their story and put a lot of backstory in is that they don't want the reader to feel confused about being in this situation with these characters and not really understanding what's going on or who they are or why they're making the decisions that they make. And I guess the thing that I would say to that is readers are a lot smarter than you think they are. They will pick up on the smallest of little details. And so really the kind of bits of backstory that you should put in the start is just like tiny little breadcrumbs. It might be one sentence around the character's situation, for example, with Alaskan Homecoming, that the girl has come to her hometown and doesn't want to be there. So that's not even really backstory. It's just a hint of something that has gone on in the past. I think the first chapter really needs to be all about moving the story forward, setting up the conflict and the situations. And if you feel that there is absolutely something that needs to go in there that kind of hints at things that have happened, just the barest touch, a line here or there. We don't want big paragraphs of exposition and explaining in that first chapter, because that will absolutely kill the pace of the story. And readers want to know what's happening now. They don't want to know what's happened in the past at this point. Something to watch out for: backstory masquerading as dialogue. So I have seen this again in some writers when they're sort of starting out, that they'll have two characters talking, might be, siblings or friends or whatever it is, and they'll say, oh, do you remember that time with blah, 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 put backstory in here. And then the other character says, oh yes, and then this happened, da, 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 da. People don't talk like that, really. So that's kind of, I think, a cheeky way that some people try and slip the backstory in, but just make sure that your dialogue is authentic, and do look at dialogue as a source of where you might have too much exposition coming out. What about cliched openings and things to watch out for? So again, in the hands of a skilled writer, all of these things that I'm telling you can absolutely be done, but things that can feel really cliched if they're not done in an absolutely unique way. So, number one, character walks into the house and catches their spouse cheating. I've seen so many romance novels and women's fiction novels, and people try to do this, but what's the point? I think if you start the story later on, the reader is going to know that the character was obviously affected and upset by an event like that. It's a fairly easy conclusion to jump to. So unless there is something that goes on in that scene that is absolutely pivotal to show to the reader, you don't need to show them getting cheated on. It's just not necessary. Number two, character is in a plane, on a train, driving a car, going to a destination, musing about life and the changes that she or he is about to face. Again, this is something that just will kill the pace. It's very slow, and if the person's traveling alone, then you've really set yourself up to kind of have just slabs of text and internal thoughts without any dialogue or anything going on. This can be done. I have seen people start stories really well in having a character traveling somewhere. I think Fiona Lowe did a book, and I can't for the life of me remember the name, so I'll try and put a link down below, where the character is driving down this like a kind of uneven road, and she's having an argument with her GPS, and that's hilarious. Like, it's a really great way to start the story. So you can definitely take these things and twist them to make them more interesting. Character looks into a mirror and describes her appearance. This is just, I really don't think anyone can do this well. It's just very cliched and very unrealistic. I mean, think about yourself. Always put yourself in the character's shoes. How many times do you stand in front of the mirror brushing your hair, thinking about what color your eyes are and what shape your nose is? No, you stand there and you brush your hair and go on with your day. So again, this is, I think, a way that people want to describe the way a character looks, and I see it happen a lot in first person because it's very hard to get the feeling of the character's appearance across in first person. That can be quite challenging, but this is definitely not the way to do it. It's, you know, having like the laundry list of physical traits is not going to really give your reader a great picture. They're going to have the picture in their own head that they want anyway, and it just, again, slows the pace and is not very interesting to read. An alarm goes off and the character wakes up. I have seen this a lot too. Again, it's, you know, you don't have to start the book at the start of a day. You can kind of put the reader straight into a situation that's happening, unless they're waking up and there is something really interesting about that situation. Good example of that would be Before I Go to Sleep by S.J. Watson, where the character has no ability to retain short-term memory, so she wakes up every day and has no idea where she is, why she's in bed with this man who turns out to be her husband. That's a really interesting kind of way of having a character wake up and start a story, but don't think that you need to start the book at the start of a day. If there's a more interesting point, then go with that. Something to watch out for when you start your story with a piece of action is just making sure that you don't start too far into the action, that the reader will have no idea what's going on, and you know, the person's on the run, and why should we care about these people, what's going on? It can be a bit of a confusing way to start the story. So just make sure, if you are going to go with an action opening, that you have enough at the start of the story to kind of hook the reader to care about your character before everything goes to hell. Okay, so here are a few things that you can do to really get a good grasp on what a strong opening means, and also to work on your own things as well. Pick up a few of your favorite books from your shelf and have a look at the way that they open. There are, even if you Google best openings of books or something like that, there are definitely plenty of examples out there of the way that great books have been started that might spark an idea for you. Have a look at your current manuscript and just go through with a highlighter, if it's printed out or on Word or Scrivener or whatever you use, and mark up any bits of backstory in your opening chapter, and then have a look at how much highlighted space you have. If you've only got a few lines here and there, then you're good to go. If you have slabs of text that are now highlighted, then you may need to think about how you can get that information in later in the story and make your opening chapter a little more fast-paced. If there's something about your opening scene that just isn't working, try writing a new opening scene. That's the great thing about working on a computer, is you can have a bunch of different files for opening scenes, and you can play with them and see what works. So if you've got it in the hero's point of view and it just doesn't seem to be working, maybe switch it up and try it in the heroine's point of view. Try dropping them into a different part of the story, bringing it forward or back, changing the setting. There's a million different things that you can do to change up that opening scene and to find out what actually works. The other thing that you can do is have a go at the different opening types that I mentioned earlier. There's action, empathy, and a point of change. Try writing an opening for each of those things and just see if one of them is connecting better with your story than others. I really hope you found this video helpful. If you're interested in more writing craft type videos like this, give me a thumbs up and leave a comment below letting me know what particular topics you'd like me to talk about. Again, these are just all things that I have experienced through my journey of writing to date and the things that I see when reading other people's work, judging competitions, and being a reader myself. So definitely would love to hear from you if there's anything in particular that you'd like me to talk about, or if you just want more, let me know that as well, because your feedback really helps me to create the videos that you find interesting. Thank you so much for watching. If you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you guys very soon. Thanks so much. Bye.